Welcome to Encounter, where we celebrate putting faith into action and community leaders who live out compassion, grace, and love. We're a program of the Broome County Council of Churches that addresses food insecurity through CHOW and the Greater Good Grocery, provides hospital and jail ministry, builds wheelchair ramps, and assists neighbors with transportation and shopping services through Faith in Action volunteers. We invite you to the conversation. Encounter your neighbors as we learn to walk together in love and kindness.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack. I'm the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. A lot of years ago, too many that I care to even remember or try to count, I listened to a segment by Bill Moyer when he was on NPR where he had a group of people that he would meet with on a weekly basis, and they would talk through the book of Genesis. And the folks that came to this group were, there were Christians, there were Jewish people, there were Muslims, there were agnostics, there were poets, there were politicians. There was like almost the entire hodgepodge of humanity that we have would gather around this text, and then they would read a story and then reflect on it. And one of the stories that has always made a profound impact on me and my life and my thinking is the story of Cain and Abel. And to help me talk through this loaded story are two profound ministers in our area. Douglas Taylor, who's a good friend, he's been on Encounter through, I don't know, before I came in at the Council of Churches. So I've been there for this is my 18th year. So you've been around a long time and have done this for a long.
I thought you weren't going to count the years.
I'm not officially counting it, but we'll get there, right? So we have Douglas Taylor, and then we also have he's from the Unitarian Universalist Church. He's the pastor of that congregation, and then we also have Micah Friedman, who is probably one of he's a rabbi of Temple Israel. He's been on Encounter before a couple of times, but he is probably one of the newest ministers in the area. He is just last year, really.
That's right. It's been less than a year. I moved in July, so I'm appreciating for the first time the winter season up here in Broome County. But
we brought some for you.
We brought some for you today. Yeah, today is one of those days where we do have some white squalls going on outside.
We hope it won't be the time you're listening to watching this.
By this, we hope spring is sprung, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so Micah, would you lead us through the reading of the text, and then from there we'll start a discussion.
Great. So the text you chose, Joe, for today is from Genesis 4, Bereshit, Daled, the story of Cain and Abel, or it's more often pronounced Cain and Abel. So I brought with me a kind of classic way of printing the Torah in Jewish tradition, where we have the biblical text surrounded by ancient and medieval and early modern commentaries, but you have a classic Christian translation of the story right there, the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible.
I do.
So why don't we read for the sake of everyone's understanding from this translation? You can find in your own source whatever your preferred translation is, the 4th chapter of Genesis. Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Next she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel, for his part, brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it." Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out into the field." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who came upon him would kill him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. I think that's as far as you outlined for us.
Yeah. So what do you think of that reading, Douglas? Like, what's your first impression?
Oh, first impression. Well, I mean, it's hard to come at a text like this with a first impression, because so often people grow up in a culture where this is a text that is so resonant,
Right.
and has such a constellation of mythos and archetype around it that it's hard to have a first impression, because it's so laden in our culture with interpretations, right? Mm. So certainly the piece that, to actually answer your question, is the murder.
Right.
You know, what stands out most is the way in which this text amplifies the first real big devastating thing that we as humans do to each other. And it happens all the time around us still. Mm. That this is a story of something that continues to be happening today. Murder, rising up out of jealousy, out of the sense of I deserved something, mm-hmm. and committing this ultimate act of violence of taking a life. Yeah, that's what stands out to me.
It seems that when you read through it, you're sitting there going, sibling rivalry, it's trivial, it's not in depth. That the conflict is, you're wondering, where does the conflict come from? Like, how does it transpire in that way? But there is something deep seated in this relationship between brothers that we're not really getting in our culture these days, right? Is that correct, Micah?
Oh, say more of what you're thinking about.
Well, I'm thinking about like how favor is rendered onto the firstborn, or how we. So if you're reading through Genesis specifically, it's supposed to go from the father to the firstborn son to, and that's how favor is kind of determined, and so you have this kind of logic to it, but yet in the Cain and Abel story, that's not what happens, right? So how would within that culture, how would we understand it, this story? Because it seems like instead of going with primogeniture, which is the fancy word that we throw around for
the inheritant of
the
the
inheritant
firstborn.
of the firstborn, right?
Right.
How so we're getting away from primogeniture. Instead, God gives His favor to Abel.
Right.
And,
So that is this surprise that happens over and over again throughout the book of Genesis, right? So we never
Right.
see introduced formally the principle of primogeniture, that the firstborn should get a double portion in Genesis. It does come up later in the 5 books of Moses as a sort of standard law, but it seems to be assumed that that's the way that
Right,
the
right.
world functioned in the ancient world. Yet in every single family story we encounter in Genesis,
It doesn't
that
happen.
assumption is radically challenged,
Yes.
right? This, as the first family in the Bible, the first family also challenges that story. I have often thought about the later stories of Abraham and Sarah and their descendants primarily as the way in which that principle is challenged more so than in Cain and Abel. But here too, right? Cain is the firstborn, and Abel is the secondborn, and Cain offers a sacrifice from his crops, from his produce, vegetables that he grows from the earth, and Abel offers a sacrifice, an offering, a gift to God. The word used in Hebrew, mincha, also refers to a gift one person can give to another. From the fruits of his work being the firstborn animal of his flock, and his is heated. What exactly does it mean that God regards the offering?
Right.
That's an interesting question. I'll say an interesting extra layer also onto the upsetting of the firstborn is that I think the text begs the question: why did God not regard Cain's offering? Right?
And that's ultimately the question. Like, who puts this whole thing together? It's God who is on the hook for this, right? How do you deal with that? Like,
Great. So on some level, God is the one. God heeds the offering of Abel, sha'ah in Hebrew, and rather sort of to be attentive to in a way that he's not to or that the divine is not to Cain. And there is an interesting clue in the text that signals one classical interpretation from within the rabbinic tradition, which it says that Abel brought also from the firstborn of his flock,
right.
as a sacrifice. And that phrase, he brought also from the firstborn, it's clear that he's bringing the firstborn, the best, the first of his flock as an offering, which we understand to be a general principle of what we should give to God, what should we bring to our service, to our desire to act for the holy and the good, for the best of what we have to give, the firstborn. And that Cain, by contrast, is understood, and much of rabbinic interpretation, to have brought his leftovers.
So whatever's left at the end.
Rather than the first fruits, which become a mitzvah, a commandment upon the children of Israel to bring in every year their first fruits as an offering. So there's an extra layer that Abel, even though he was the second-born son, had a different regard in his relationship to the animals he tended, to what it meant to bring his first, his best, than Cain. But still, I don't know that justifies the extent of the disagreement, right? Or explains the degree of the feeling of animosity that Cain experiences.
So Douglas, I mean, when you've and we've been preaching for a long time now.
Yeah.
I mean, like I think you were sharing on Facebook or something that you're over 25 years into this process. So, how have you addressed this passage?
So there was I got that question from some folks in the congregation. Like, it doesn't seem like God is fair here. What's going on with Cain and Abel? And I approached that text with that question in heart. Like, is God fair? Which is in Unitarian Universalism, we approach the text with a lot more an eye toward the kind of the mythic, the symbolic interpretations of it. And one of the ways that I look into this is perhaps a little heretical, but to interpret these as the stories that are told rather than facts that happened. And in this interpretation, one possible way to look at this is that God is a character rather than an actual actor, right? That the question arises from I've come to life, I've brought my gift, and it wasn't received. The universe, I do what I can, and still everything gets messed up. I suffer, and things still get worse.
Yeah.
Why am I suffering? What have I done wrong? And so they insert this character.
So it's almost like a mother.
Right.
Or a father.
Sure, a character like a parent who will offer some interpretation of what's happening, that the universe isn't fair. You go out into nature, and just because you're a nice person doesn't mean that you'll find berries when you go hunting for berries. Life isn't always fair. And so they use the character of God to kind of help shape what that could mean.
Right.
And that the message that I hear in this is my response is still something that is mine.
Right.
Like what happened out in the world that made me feel angry or made me upset or made me feel like I didn't get what I deserved is still out there.
Right.
And we can call it the universe or we can call it God. But my response to that is mine.
Right.
And I need to own that. And I think that's part of what is in this story.
Profound. In some ways, what I'm hearing from you, Douglas, is that the story is crafted in a way, is told in a way, that is meant to also prompt in us an empathy with Cain.
Yeah, with Cain.
To feel along with him what it's like to make an offering and to not be received, to not have our effort be honored or to lead to what we're hoping, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then to feel this something like this cryptic response, to feel that there's a temptation to harm that is within us, that has some power, and that Cain is an example of what not to do, right? To not allow that anger, that envy, that jealousy, whatever his experience was precisely, to overpower us such that we
Now, I know neither one of you have read the book East of Eden, but this fueled John Steinbeck. This conflict, this idea, fueled him for 1,000 pages, right? So, East of Eden is not a very, very small book. It is a lot of, like I told you when we were talking about this, that it could take you a week to get through it or more, depending on how quickly you read. But the issue that he dealt with was families and how families operate and how that works out. But we do see this kind of at work too within politics, don't we? Or within the current conflicts throughout the world, right? So it's not a dead text. I mean, these stories continue to have power, don't they?
I'll of course say yes to that, Joe. I mean, I am part of the motivating belief and experience is that turning to ancient texts, stories, laws, and practices speak in a timeless way to our ongoing human experience, right? And that really came up this year when we, in our annual cycle of reading through the Torah, arrived at the first Torah portion in Genesis, the week after October 7th, after the horrific attack that led to this ongoing, heartbreaking war and devastating humanitarian situation. please God, by the time this airs, may we be in a different reality than we find ourselves today.
And for our listeners and our viewers, Micah's speaking about the conflict in Palestine and the horrific rationale behind that too, right? I mean the terrible amount of people that died because of the
horrible attack of October 7th, perpetrated by Hamas. Yes, and the ongoing active animosity that we see in the land of Israel and Palestine, and certainly in our political divides, speaks to the power of anger to motivate violence, right? And to our ongoing need, I think, to internalize what Cain says in his devastation, Hashomer achi anochi, am I the guardian of my brother? And to realize that we are indeed the guardians of our brothers and sisters, that it's upon us to not only be concerned for ourselves, but also for everyone with whom we share the planet that we have inherited from these ancient figures.
And so
I really do wish God had just made that clear. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes. Come on, God.
Come on.
Just yes.
Yes, just say it. Agree with me, anyway, but how does that play out in the text? Like that, and what does the ambiguity around that mean? I mean so are we only there for the people who we agree with, or are we there for people that's in Christian theology, we if you get to the story of Matthew, where Jesus is laying out the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacekeepers, is part of that. Like, do we, how far does being our brother's guardian, using that word, brother's keeper, how far does that extend? Are we on the hook for even with those people that we disagree with? Do we how far does that go? Like, how far do we go with that?
I know this sounds like an interesting, maybe uninteresting tangent, but to answer your question, let me point out there's a really curious character in the text that is not usually noticed. The earth itself
exactly
has some lines, almost, not actually, but like the earth itself cried out at your brother's blood, right, and received it. Like the earth has this part to play,
and then
in what happened,
and then it seizes up and it keeps it from the
So there's this way in which our actions have an impact beyond just us. There's this network of impact that happens, and it's not just me and my sibling. It's not just me and my relationship with God. It's even pieces that we don't necessarily think about. The earth itself cried out, and that sense of where is our responsibility? To whom are we accountable for our behaviors, for our misdeeds, and who gets hurt here?
And how does that relate to the command of God to tend and to keep, in Genesis 1 specifically, Micah? I mean, we're supposed to tend and care for, be stewards of the earth. And yet, here the earth is rebelling against the violence that we've done to each other, and has and kept itself from being fruitful.
So your question was, to what extent do we have some responsibility to be our siblings' keepers, even those that we disagree with? And I would say even that. The answer is yes.
Yes, of course.
But even that is not enough it's not big enough. We have a responsibility to
the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful, right? I think in some ways, right, how to reckon with ambiguity in biblical text, right? I think one of the reasons I've been taught to appreciate ambiguity in text is that it leads us to continue to ask central moral questions.
There we go.
Right? Like, to what extent am I responsible for keeping safe others? Right? Even my sibling with whom I'm fighting, even someone who has a different family tree for many generations with whom I share responsibility in this earth or in this locale. Right? And in some ways, what exactly is the scope of that responsibility has been the question of religious leaders, of political philosophers, and since time immemorial. And of course, as sort of spiritual leaders, we're going to make the message that we have a greater degree of responsibility than you're inclined to, right? To take more responsibility for each other. I'll say, I think this interresponsibility of earth and humanity is baked into the particular words in the text too. The first word of this chapter, V'ha-Adam, and the human, or the Adam, is the exact same letters as the character of the earth. Adamah, turning the hay, which makes the man at the end of the word, makes it the earth, which holds the blood, and allows the blood to cry out in testament to the grief of, I would say, both the humans and the earth at the way in which we can fail to live up to the moral mandate of the Torah, of the Bible, of our traditions, to a greater degree of responsibility. And
one of the things that I had hoped to have come out of this conversation, and I think we've seen it today and we've experienced it, is that around texts like this, we can have a Universalist, a Jewish rabbi, a Universalist minister, a Christian minister sitting around a text, and we can have a meaningful conversation in spite of the fact that we have differences.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of one of the things that I think that we need to embody as followers of this text, people who have been involved with this conflict between Cain and Abel, or that even God sets up in some ways throughout the entire book by giving us free will. That we can do this. We can have a conversation, and we can leave here feeling like we're deeper friends than what we were when we first came in. And my prayer for all of you today is that you would be able to experience this kindness, this joy, and perhaps the depths of this text in your everyday life, and live out a kinder and more gentler way of being in the world. Thanks for listening.